Uncertain Futures
with Patrick and Joan.
How's it going, Joan?
Not too bad. How are you?
Very good, very good. I had a relatively okay lockdown week, I suppose. What about yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite. It's just normal now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it doesn't make for good conversation. Unlike the future.
Getting right down to it. Yeah, I have no fun anecdotes for you this week.
This isn't an anecdote podcast, all right?
No.
Unless they're anecdotes about the future involving, interesting future stuff. Or the past, of course. Because we're here to present ideas about how the future could be and how it could be very different. In good ways, bad ways, and hopefully many weird ways. And every week, myself and Joan each present to each other some notion of the future that people may have had or that they might have now. And we kind of explore just the vibes about what it would feel like and what it would seem like. Anything to add to that, Joan?
No, you're always very concise and to the point, unlike myself. So.
Oh, I don't know about that now. Did get a bit lost there the other day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the intro world, I suppose.
Okay. Well, that's important, I suppose.
Yeah. That's what intros are supposed to be.
So it's now your turn to go first, as I see it. So I'm very curious to hear what is this project that has been causing the scribbling on the other side of the microphone?
Causing the scribbling. Now you're making it feel like I actually have a lot of. I have so much prepared for this. Well, okay. As a means of introduction, then. So. Like we're all, quite isolated these days, more than normally. And yeah, I think a lot of people have been calling and messaging friends and family more than we normally would.
Definitely, yeah.
Or I feel that it's been like that for me and for a lot of other people that I've been talking to. And another element of kind of being in contact with people in a way that I've had recently is that I'm doing this project where and it's kind of about walking and thinking and don't need to go into it all here, but one thing that I've been doing as part of that, or like inviting people to contribute to it, is I've been inviting people to make audio recordings of walks that they're taking like under the lockdown, or even if it's like on the way to the supermarket or like going to work, if they still have to go to work, like in places where people maybe can't just go out for a walk, or from the inside their apartment if they really can't go out for a walk. And I've mentioned to them that part of it as well is that if they want, they can record their thoughts, but it's also just that most people are sending us, or we're mostly collecting just recordings of like the sound of them walking and the environment around them. And it's all going to become one big audio track, one big walk.
One big walk of
and
sound.
Yes, exactly, just a walk. And so anyway, this is not just trying to plug this project, although if anyone wants to do it, you'll be welcome. But yeah, the thing is that it's been surprisingly interesting. I mean, I thought, I was interested in the idea anyway, but it's been like quite an interesting experience listening to the recordings people are sending me. And I sort of, it's been more I suppose, emotive than I expected. And a lot of people actually that I've been asking, including people that I wouldn't think would want to do it or like would record themselves talking, have done that. Like people really start talking to the the recording device and kind of saying their thoughts or wherever they're walking, or just a bit of their stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's been just surprisingly lovely to listen to them, and you kind of feel this sort of weird presentness with them, like friends in Dublin and Cork and Athens and California and Naples and like all these different places, and yeah, I don't know. I suppose it's partly the lockdown talking, but it has felt more like it has felt very nice and kind of reassuring to have this sort of like strange audio intimacy with people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And of course they're like what they're saying is influenced by the fact that it's for this project and there's things they probably wouldn't say or things they feel they should say, because of the context of the project, and that influences it. But at the same time, it feels more like listening in on someone's thoughts than it would if they were sending me like a normal WhatsApp audio message or a text or if we were on the phone.
Yeah.
Um, so even though it's completely ubiquitous now, or we take it for granted that we can send messages over the internet to friends and family on the other side of the world, and like smartphones are so ubiquitous, and data and Wi-Fi and all that. But this form of this, how we're asking people to send the recordings, it kind of brought back some of the novelty of being able to hear what someone else is thinking on that same day, or like 1,000 kilometers away or something.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So, yeah, that's just kind of preamble to, or also led me to, what I want to talk about this week. So this week I thought I'd tackle the small little topic of, in the future, will we be able to read people's minds?
Oh, shit! I did not expect, a leap of that kind, and I'm looking forward to it.
Looking forward to reading people's minds.
I'm looking forward to the whole concept of mind reading in its future evaluated form.
Yeah. So basically telepathy, like, will that be a thing? So okay, so I'll do a little, I'll spiel a little bit more about that, and then maybe we can see what you think about
I'm
it.
gonna have loads of thoughts now.
And I can't read them right now. but maybe in the future we could also have like there would be telepathic podcasts. Like we could just sit and we would have a conversation, and like we'd have some sort of telepathic live stream. We wouldn't have to do this YouTube. I mean, thank you, YouTube.
But, I'm sure YouTube would be the ones to develop it at this stage. Google.
Probably. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves now. So telepathy, it's in a lot of sci-fi kind of movies, like even like the Force or something in Star Wars, or like and there's a lot of movies, or in like the X-Men and things like.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It's a kind of classic sci-fi. I don't want to say trope, but thing that in sci-fi that in the future there will be people, or all people, or there'll be certain technologies where we can read each other's mind. We can
mythology, surely. Like it's older than sci-fi.
Yeah.
Even, yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I suppose exactly. Like in a lot of like say mythology and stuff, and some people who have certain powers to be able to like read people's minds or read the future or whatever. So even though it's really, I feel like even the word is sort of surrounded with this kind of like very kind of unrealistic, maybe crazy speculative ability or something. But it's really not that it's not the most far-fetched thing, really, because there are already brain machine interfaces, or brain computer interfaces, which are called like BMIs usually. Nothing to do with body mass index. And like the most common one, which is quite an amazing technology, although it's quite like everyday, or a lot of people are kind of familiar with it, wouldn't think too much about it, and if they don't have one, which is a cochlear implant.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's very successful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's slightly controversial, but still pretty amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like controversial within like you mean within the deaf community, or
yes.
So we can talk about that in a second maybe. But
it's too much to talk about. We'll have to come back to that one.
Just trying to keep us a little bit on the track here. No, just because I feel like this is such a big. I'm careful not to sprawl too much.
I agree. Yes.
Into. I'm more just mostly talking to myself here. So a cochlear implant is captures like a sound signals, and it sends them to a receiver that's implanted under the skin behind behind your ear,
Yeah.
and the receiver sends signals to electrodes implanted in the like snail-shaped the inner ear, the cochlea, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then the signals stimulate the auditory nerve, and which then directs them to the brain. So the brain interprets those signals as sounds, although the sounds are not like normal hearing. So it takes a while. Apparently, after about a year of kind of just getting used to it and some like kind of a bit of training, that people can learn to interpret that quite well. But yeah, it does sound different. So it's not like a hearing aid which just amplifies the sound.
Yeah.
But this is like, yeah, so of course you need to have like a work, it's if someone has hear loss from inner ear damage or severe hearing loss, it can restore it can basically simulate hearing, but it's not, but it's actually doing it by picking up the sounds, and it's not by amplifying it like a hearing aid, but picking up the sounds and then sending a signal, which is going to send a signal to your brain, like through, through the inner ear. So it is kind of talking to basically an implant that is then talking to directly to your brain, skipping over the usual how your ear would usually process sound. So yeah, and then why you were saying it's controversial is which maybe actually that's better to pick up on later
I think that's right. I think we should continue along the train here of listing the.
So there's hang on, I wanted to look at, there was a really good kind of academic or medical article I found about brain-computer interfaces, which was called Brain-Computer Interfaces, a powerful tool for scientific inquiry. And then just there is a little anecdote. I know you said we're not an anecdote podcast, but this is a relevant anecdote. So in the spring of 1965, an article titled "Matador with a Radio Stops Wired Bull" appeared in the New York Times. And the article garnered considerable public attention, given that the matador was not a matador, but actually a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
And it was this Yale neuroscientist, Jose Delgado, who showed that a charging bull, animals like a charging bull, could be stopped in their tracks by using a radio transmitter, which sent signals to an implant called the stemoceiver, which stimulated the caudate nucleus in the animal's brain. So it was not about making a remote-controlled bull, but to test the hypotheses about the role of subcortical structures in animals' drive to eat. Kind of quite specific thing, but it was sort of this was one of the first experiments in a series of experiments, from the 60s, in a field now called now known as brain-computer interfacing. And so it's mostly about the things to make scientific discoveries about the nervous system. So often it was just using that technology to find out things about the nervous system. So sort of like how the nervous system communicates with the brain. So it's basically often the brain machine interface is taking information from your nervous system and then going directly to the brain with it. Or sorry. Said that wrong. So it's going via your nervous system. Yeah. See, this is the problem here. I'm so not a neuroscientist. So I was like, I want to avoid getting too deep into trying to explain details, because I'm just going to make a mess of it. But there's different versions. This article also says that people kind of more in kind of popular culture or science or knowledge, people kind of think about BMIs being something to you can control a robotic arm, which has been there has been things about prosthetics in recent years, that how people can control them using just their mind with this similar kind of technologies. But that there's there's also cochlear implants, and there's loads of different kind of types of them. And there's ones that are very kind of an implanted chip, or you can also just have, for certain treatments, you can kind of wear a cap, or sort of an EEG kind of looking thing. So there's lots of different forms, and some of them, there's advanced ones that will be two-way interfaces, so they can record brain activity and stimulate it. But the basic thing is the brain to computer, brain to machine. So it's turning the brain activity. This is the very dumbed down version of it, because let's not
Yes, of
like
course.
go into detail that I'm going to mess up on. But the turning your brain activity into data that can then be used to control like software or hardware.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the basic thing. And then the advanced ones will be two-way interfaces, so they could record brain activity, but then they could also stimulate it, go the other way. And there is also um, so another form of this that is being used as well is this kind of BMI that's used for people with Parkinson's.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's a deep
that
brain stimulator.
mhm,
I've seen the research on that. Yeah.
yeah. So that when it can, but it can be implanted and it can kind of be turned on and off. So and when it's turned on, then it's sort of so it's gonna send a certain signal to a certain or a certain part of the brain, or give this kind of deep brain stimulation part of the brain that is affected or impacted with Parkinson's, and it's really effective, like really as much as dramatically as turning on a switch, like turning on a light switch, um, that to stop people having these shakes or tremors that are kind of quite
Yeah, and
characteristic of
debilitating, of
Parkinson's.
course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite amazing. Like it really is this sort of like, oh, you turn a switch and it can. I mean, it's not for, and not everyone. I think it's suitable for everyone who has Parkinson's, but it's quite dramatic, the results.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there has been a bit of controversy about it, because there have been some patients um, who it was effective for in terms of reducing the tremors, but that they had altered personality while it was switched on. So in that they became more impulsive. So there's this possible problem that maybe there's other things being affected, like sort of side effects, mainly to do with their impulsivity in terms of
Yeah.
buying things, or also being more sexually forward, including to nurses if they're in like a nursing home or something, or like in a hospital setting, and yeah, just kind of being
Which is
yeah
with Parkinson's is a problem that has been experienced before with the use of L-Dopa at very high doses, um, also causing those kinds of more erratic behaviors or something. It's a
mm,
difficult one, all right, but it's
yeah
certainly amazing when you see those videos of a deep brain stimulator being turned on, and a Parkinson's patient going from being, barely mobile in any coordinated sense to just sort of standing up and being able to. It's pretty striking. Um,
yeah yeah, exactly. It's very like dramatic. So yeah, so just a few things about this, of like possibilities of where this would go. There have been kind of also tests of or things that they've done of uh attaching someone, that someone is hooked up to all this, and the idea is that then they will kind of try to uh, be looking at a rat, and something about a rat wanting to focusing on a light above a rat's tail, trying to get the rat to wag its tail, and then that the rat is also linked up into the sound, and then it basically it's going to, so that it will stimulate the parts of the rat's brain that would control these motor functions and movements, and including the tail, and it would start to wag its tail. So yeah, getting into this, I suppose, a bit like, could someone control someone else's brain, or like
yeah,
could
yeah.
send some kind of signal. And so, yeah, sorry, didn't explain that very much in detail, but anyway, you get the gist. There is
Yeah,
this
there are
kind
some
of
really striking
these things.
examples with rats of that, in the sense that you can, using understanding that we've got from optogenetics, of rat structures that can be stimulated, you can essentially turn on aggression and then turn it off, and then turn on mating behavior and then turn it off, and then do it again, all in sequence, and the rat will just go
Yeah,
from being aggressive to being placid to mating to being aggressive,
yeah,
etc. So it's a very
yeah.
striking demonstration.
Yeah. So there's all different kinds of things, I suppose, that could like develop from this. But I suppose it's all like these kind of things, like even things that they've done of like, three people are in separate rooms, and one person is doing say playing a kind of Tetris or something, and the other people in the other room, they can see like what's going on at the bottom of the screen, but the person who's playing it can't actually see, and they have to kind of somehow with their mind focus to either say yes, you should turn the brick, or you shouldn't turn the brick, and then the person who's playing it is able to kind of receive those signals in a way. But it's still, I mean, that seems yeah, quite cool in a way, but it's at the same time it's like um that's quite far from obviously reading somebody's mind. So to be able to like read someone's mind, you'd also have to decide. It brings up interesting questions about how coherent are our thoughts, or like to what
Yeah,
extent can our
absolutely, of
thoughts be
course.
decoded, and what because it's you have really have to focus. I mean, it's one thing to maybe you would think that, or like I suppose if this kind of thing became more prevalent, it would also be used like we would probably have to. You'd have to even how it is now, like you have to kind of focus on a certain area, looking at a certain light or a certain word or a certain, so it's quite focused in and simplified. And it might be that we'd have to learn how to think clearly in a way if we want to communicate in that way. Like the same way that say, when I've lived like now living here or when I've lived, in places apart from Ireland, you kind of adapt it. You try to speak a bit slower and that just becomes normal because, I'm just trying, which is also reminding me we should also right now be trying to do that. But anyway, um, hopefully I'm coherent enough. Yeah, so the same way we do with language or with different kind of people, you might kind of make yourself make yourself understood by adapting your speech. I suppose we'd have to do the same thing with our thoughts when we started, if we did start to kind of communicate this way. So I thought that's an interesting question about thinking itself and how, like, to what it's probably very far fetched that we could really read complex thoughts, or very far from here, far from where we are. But there's also, yeah, I suppose there's different possibilities there. There could be like, you played a clip or a thing about from the Matrix, which I feel like it might be a recurring thing that we're gonna mention, but there's just so much in it. But like when he he can download skills like kung fu. He's like, I can
Yeah,
do
that's
kung
a
fu
pretty
now.
exciting possibility. I'm not going to give up
Yeah,
on that one in the abstract.
yeah. No, exactly. So maybe like knowledge or skill exchange, but then some things that like how it's information or facts, or even in bodily, like your body knowing how to do certain things, like
Hmm.
that seems more difficult, but maybe more feasible than deep kind of concepts. There's so much understanding to learning that it seems hard to transmit. Just by, yeah, I don't know. Like maybe there's some kind of you can do some kind of brain tutorials or brain classes, where you wouldn't have to go anywhere, but you would have this kind of like an ongoing process. It seems like hard to just download a file of like, um, ever like existentialism, the whole history of the philosophy of, or like, uh, yeah, I don't know, nuclear physics or whatever. It just
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like
and
you'd
with
be able
different
to like,
categories of knowledge come with different levels of difficulty to sort of take in.
yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, if you're capable of engineering that, you've developed an understanding of the human mind that would be radically superior to what we could sort of guess at in a sense. So you'd have to sort of have determined a lot of things about it, how information is stored in the mind, or it would
Yeah, like
immediately become experimentally obvious, even if you hadn't.
what?
As in, like the process of doing that downloading and stuff would demonstrate so much about what human thought was, or something.
Yeah. Um. Uh. Yeah. Exactly. Like it seems so much to be. I mean, maybe they will be like that in the future. But anyway, another couple of things I suppose that like then it also opens up to is sort of I suppose what I said about telepathy. There's two sides to it because there's like maybe consensual like telepathic communication, and then there could be like brain like mind like thought spying or brain tapping, or somebody listening into your thoughts that you don't want to listen into your thoughts, which you know gets into kind of Big Brother territory, 1984, or
Yeah,
brain hacking, or like coercion, or yeah. But on the other side, there's amazing. It could be amazing possibilities of like people who have become mute or paralyzed or have locked in syndrome.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I
would
mean,
they be able to communicate again? So, and so maybe though that's the area where it really would be, that maybe there would be incentive as well to develop it for people to be able to, there's kind of systems, I suppose, of like um blinking, or I think this already. I hadn't really looked into that. I just kind of thought of it as a like yeah, one group of people, I suppose, who would really gain a lot from
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
kind of like
Locked-in syndrome is a very good
beyond
example.
novelty.
I mean, locked-in syndrome has been a target for all this kind of research for a long time. All the most intensive BCI stuff, it's kind of hard to justify the early stage research with anyone but locked-in patients, especially if it's invasive.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, there's obviously loads to this, but like that's just a little, yeah, maybe it's already time that you can maybe throw in your wait. There was one other that I did
That's
find.
fine.
Sorry,
Yeah.
one. Um, where is this now? Oh yes, I did find there's some websites that call the dangers of telepathy.
Oh.
Um, yes. Mainstream science denies the existence of this phenomenon, but many people claim they have experienced this several times. For example, people who are in love experience telepathy more frequently. Mothers have it with their children, blah blah blah. But it also says something about how it can be, uh, yes. Oh, it's an interesting kind of like a combination of internet security. So it's just like you have to build up your own security in case you have secrets you don't want to be touched by strangers, or like a
Hmm.
trauma or something. Um, yeah, and telepathy could access the trauma of the collective mind, and the pain would be too much. So for sure, more security level layers are needed. That's what they're saying on this website. Um,
Well, I mean, what I would
so
take
yeah,
from that website.
but that if there was no pain in the world, then telepathy would be normal. But actually, the pain that we have and suffering we have means that we're holding ourselves back because we don't want to know what other people think and what they've experienced. I think it's
I mean, I think it can
quite an
be.
interesting point.
It's interesting as sort of highlighting like potential psychological consequences of telepathy. But I think what's more problematic about it as a source is that, as well as being the subject of comic book, religious, and just popular mystical fascination, telepathy is a concept that features very, very prominently in mental illness. Possibly for kind of reasons relating to its significance in other contexts. Um, but it
Reasons
is
related to
striking
what now?
to mental illness.
No, but sorry, you said for reasons related to.
For the reasons related to the fact that it's considered such an important topic in other contexts. I think the idea that it is such
Oh,
a
okay, yeah,
big deal is it means that it pops in a lot. But
yeah.
but regarding so I was holding back and I'm gonna try my best to be concise. This is a class topic. I mean, especially when you throw in the emphasis on BCIs, it's something that I've been obsessed with, and was one of the sort of big subjects in science that I first read just a few popular science books about, and it's got a lot of interesting angles that have been developing, in recent times. So, one of them would be different methods of interfacing with the neurons instead of using direct probes, as was the case in kind of some of the earlier studies where they were getting robot arms moved. There was Miguel Nicodelis is a researcher who did a lot of cool stuff in that field. But then later on now, people have started using genetics to use genes to control the neurons, which is way more precise. And then you can use light activated genes, and then you can get them to emit light, and so you can read and write a signal like you were talking about. But the one that I thought would be the most relevant to bring up was Mary Lou Jepson. So she basically succeeded with other researchers to read minds using an MRI. So what they did was they trained an MRI kind of software that was taking data from an MRI and also looking at the pictures that people were looking at when the MRI was reading their minds, as it were, and just trained it over time to make correlations between this information, such that when they then had people sleeping in the MRI could produce images which you can look at on YouTube, and they're kind of like grayscale-y and a bit off, but they are the images that we can presume would be going on in a dreaming context. It's fuzzier than what they do in reality when they just show people pictures. It can basically reproduce the image that they're seeing. So I think that's like a really cool demonstration, and she has some technology that she's developing at the moment which if it does what it claims will basically use a much cheaper method of an MRI to do that much more precisely and be able to read information as well as writing it. Write information as well as reading it. That's it. So it's a really exciting space, and it could just blow up really quickly. But yeah, that doesn't resolve any of the questions of what it would do to us in terms of our ability to empathize or feel each other's pain or like that. That remains very confusing. I do think there's one other example that is worth considering, which is these Canadian twins called Krista and Tatiana Hogan. They're probably around 8 or 9 years old now, and they were conjoined at birth. There's a documentary or two about them. It was a close call because
they're telepathic or what?
Well, their heads, their actual skulls are fused, and they share neural tissue. So there's a bridge going between the thalamus of each girl of neurons, which are active. They've been MRI'd many times, and it seems to be the case, unless it's a really big con, and which would involve a lot of researchers as well as documentarians. It seems like when you hold an object in front of one of the girls, the other one who's facing the other way can reach up and spot exactly where it is. If you tickle one of the girls, the other one laughs. They coordinate each other's behavior non-verbally in ways that suggest, a sort of functional exchange of information. And if that's possible, then I think that's kind of a proof of concept that you can do a lot by sharing information more directly, as telepathy would be want to.
Because one thing, one more banal thing in terms of rather than spying people's thoughts and stuff, is that maybe it will make all these smart devices, smartphones that we're so attached to these days, redundant. If you could, say, send messages to people just with your mind, you know what I mean? You could just as sort of a communication like that.
Absolutely. I mean,
we would just be that in the future, it'll be like, oh, the fact that we had to carry around these things and we had to spend money on them and they were broke and
and they get wet,
and ran out of memory and
people would just
that it
look
would
at
seem
them
a
and
really
not talk to each other.
Because now we feel that compared to if we had, maybe we feel the same way about smartphones as we feel, which we now still go on all the time about how amazing they are, having this computer in our pocket, and will we look back at them the way we look at old home phones with wires and
with the
remember
dials where you had
up
to put your finger in and and do the whole way around. You know what I'm talking about? Little cash register phones.
Or also the cord, phones with cords. I remember as a kid when we had that this phone, and then we're going to ring my friends and having to we'd pull the phone as far as I could up the stairs to go into my room, but I'd kind of have to I think it didn't even go all the way into my room, so I'd just sit in the hall outside the bathroom because that was as far as I could go from away from downstairs in the hall where close to my family or something to call my friend when I was 12 or something. So it's even funny thinking back to phones with cords.
Yeah, of course.
And so it's but then maybe we'll come into the thing of that we'd have to just spend text speak, so if people simplify what they're saying, but if we maybe through telepathy we'd also have to simplify. You'd be able to maybe first you wouldn't be able to have complex conversations, which is even hard on WhatsApp, so so you'd kind of have to simplify it into how are you, or do you want to come over, or what are you doing, or where are you, maybe there'll be a simplified
maybe what would happen is that it would actually you would see the natural adaptation, plasticity of the mind, and the sort of the different aspects of communication, which would include direct exposure to experience, just sort of naturally get good at you would become more fluent and competent over time. And even if in the initial stages one can imagine sort of a difficulty in getting anything across, after a certain amount of exposure, it would be a kind of well of communication that would vastly rival speech. And also, and this is the kind of craziest thing that I think can come of delving into it, it's conceivable that you would at some point the concept of self would really break down. I mean, beyond the sort of
Oh,
the more common notions that it already isn't there or something, but the idea that an individual consciousness would at some point, more rightly be called, a member of a larger consciousness consisting of some number of people who are particularly close knit in a telepathic way or something. I find that stuff
yeah,
very
because
mind
what's
blowing.
interesting, what's pretty interesting, um, what's interesting is that because I have been thinking a lot recently about how people think. Because one thing about this is about sort of things about language. Would we be thinking? Would you be able to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak a common language with you? Because is it going to be would it be language based? I mean, I know we're getting, this is just highly
Yeah,
speculative now,
of
and
course, of
but I
course.
think it's good to have a bit of a mix of like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the science of it, but now the more like, I suppose, the blue sky side of
yeah.
it. That like, so would it be language, or like would it be, is it something completely else, or like kind of image based? Or because I only recently, I don't know if I was talking to you about this, I only recently discovered or heard that a lot of people think in sentences and words, but I really don't. Very rarely. And I was like, because when I watch movies, and they said that when there's a voiceover of the character speak, like
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
their
yeah.
thoughts, I remember I've often looked at that and think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if that was what it was like in real life? Which some people apparently do have. Like some, have more extreme, like total monologue, and other people have just like less, but still. So even this thing of like, how do you think, and would it be? What I think is could be really cool, is would you be able to, like you said about your sense of self breaking down, would you be able to think with other people? Like I know, which
Mm.
is very different, I think, concept from a
Communicating.
conversation,
Yeah.
so if you communicate telepathically, is it still going to be in a form of conversation, or will it be, um can we actually think together? Sorry, this sounds like I'm in some kind of like startup brainstorm or
No, no,
something. Like,
but I think it's
can we think together, guys? Like put our brains together. But yeah, without, it's terrible that all that has all been co-opted, that kind of language. But you know, yeah, would we be able to? Because I think my thinking, it's different if you have to express things in words and find it, say, coherently that everyone will understand. But if you can kind of think more in the sort of concepts and feelings and how thinking often is, but with someone else as well, that would be
yeah,
quite
yeah. No, but
like a
I think it's
far along the line version.
I think that it's like, I mean, the two fundamental questions you asked there. One is like, at what point does the thinking delineate, or at what point is it just sort of one process that's integrated? And then you were also mentioning the idea of, whether there's a pre linguistic kind of symbolic means of communication that people could. Would different languages matter? Um, I think with regarding the first one is the one I really don't claim to have any clue about at all, because I don't know, there seems to be
Wait, which part is that now? Sorry, I'm
that's
already
the
lost
idea
in.
that that you would you be able to communicate telepathically with people from another language.
Yeah.
And I think that there's like a huge debate there about like to what degree is our thought dependent upon language, and as far
Mm.
as I can tell, I have no idea. um I feel like ultimately, though, again, though, if you gave enough time, then some pre-linguistics and like symbolic communication would be feasible, but it might not be as easy as just co-opting language or something. Um, but
Yeah.
what was the next part there? The
Well, it was about. But Patrick, can we have a little pause, because there's a lot of a lot of commenting going on
oh,
here
okay,
about this. So yeah, so Robbie OB is saying that, or this is a while ago now, but that every the problem is every mind is different, so we need models tailored to each individual with telepathy. So, or maybe it would be that telepathy would be harder for some people because they'd have to adapt to like whatever the system of it might be very far from their thinking, whereas
my
other
intuition
people,
here is
like
that the
for example,
is that brains would be plastic enough to cope with the new information
yeah,
effectively.
adapt, yeah. And then Jen Keane is saying, well, one thing she said is about how articles are talking about how Zoom chats are exhausting us because they trick our brains into thinking we're getting the social interaction, but without actually getting it. So this sort of Zoom fatigue, which I think a lot of people are experiencing these days. So I wonder if we'd have the similar. So she kind of said if it was similar, telepathic communication would do the same thing, and that hit similar barriers. So we could like talk to each other's, broadcast into each other's brains, but would it be as good? Like, would it fill the same need as a conversation? So that's what I was saying. Maybe the simplified thing of like you could communicate to say, hey, do you want to come over? But you wouldn't have like maybe a conversation. And
Yes.
then, sorry, somebody else, Rapin C, who is that, by the
We
way?
don't know.
Who are you? No, but they say hi, guys. So I'm just like, I know we don't know, but I'm just asking them if they can tell us who they are. Or maybe not. And then they said, yeah, Mikio Kak, theoretical physicist and futurist, predicts by 2050 brain science will have exploded. I don't really know what that means, but and it will replace entertainment. Movies will become obsolete. I'm talking about telepathy, really. Um, yes, it will reduce obstacles between people. Our grandchildren will wonder, what is a keyboard? Yeah, that's like I was saying about the smartphones. That yeah, we'll be like, what are all these things? It was so unnecessary. All these gadgets and all these things. We just
When you mentioned
yeah.
Jen's comment there, though, it did actually remind me of what your point had been, and the question of whether it would be good enough, and whether or not we'd be able to think together, and whether or not there'd be this integration between people. And I think the most likely seeming answer to it is how rich is the information being communicated, and as you up the sort of bandwidth of information going from one to another telepathically or by any BCI means, I think at a certain point you start to blur those lines in terms of thinking. You start to have like experience of communication that will probably vastly outstrip being in person with someone, and as opposed to being a Zoom fatigue type situation. But what that even means is sort of hard to piece together at the same time.
One final thought on this, because then we probably should move on, because we've been talking about this for quite a while. But it's just hard not to. But maybe what you said about our as an individual kind of breaking down, since a lot of this sense of ourselves as discrete individuals separate from the world is I suppose the experience we have in terms of our mind and thinking. You see someone else and you talk to them, but you have this sense like, yeah, but I'm in my head and I can think about things and that they won't know, and I can feel things that I don't have to express, or
of
that
course.
so but yeah, once it's oh, it's Sean. Okay. There's a reference. Sorry, in the comments.
Indeed.
But what was I saying? Oh yeah. So, but once that line is blurred, that people can maybe interact with our thoughts. We can interact with them. We can possibly this thinking together idea that, like, even say, for example, collaborating artistically or politically or whatever, that people could have negotiations or thoughts or coming up with ideas and things, and then you won't be able to you won't be able to say like, oh, this is my idea, or will you? Will it be clear, or it won't be clear in terms of like a conversation in a room or on paper? It will be maybe this all going to be recorded. That's another whole thing.
Yeah.
Will it be recorded for training purposes?
Well, I think
Or
that's the part that
telepathic
scares
communication?
people.
What?
I think that's the part that scares people.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's
Yeah, we didn't get too much into the scariness.
that's okay.
But that's like we said, often like when people are projecting into the future, we're thinking more of the like horrific
Yeah, of course.
dystopian side of it, and maybe it's interesting to look at the other. Like, actually, I thought that was something kind of uh I was listening back to a bit of what we were talking about last week when you were talking about in terms of cities and greener cities, or people living in more sustainably in big urban centers. That the fact that, not that I think you were not saying that climate change is like a climate emergency is like a good thing or opportunity, or denying the seriousness of it, but actually looking at it more, because it's, I don't know, it's hard. I think a lot of people get quite down about it, but trying to look at, well, hang on, maybe things can be go more positively, in the
We're not
future.
necessarily
And
doomed to
yeah,
fail.
so I think it's a delicate balance to, like, you have to take things seriously enough and like address things, but at the same time, like, actually be able to envision things being better, more different, or like a different way of living in the future.
I
Because
think
otherwise
that's
we're
that's
just
yeah, I think that's
stuck.
absolutely not only important. It's
Yeah,
just nice. It's just nice to be able to also, and it's just realistic as well. Because while it's important to look at bad things, there's also going to be lots of good things that happen. And so, if you want to have
yeah,
a realistic appraisal of the future, you should include those possibilities.
yeah, definitely.
But it's funny you
So
should mention that one,
that said, are
because
you going to have, say, a very dystopian, horrific future?
no, in fact, I'm actually going to be. So during my rather long-winded discussion last week, there was a point at which rewilding was mentioned, and there was a sort of brief topic that of like, how one would go about rewilding, which we sort of parked. I think you explicitly said that would be the subject of a whole other podcast. And guess what it is? So, I'm going to
even though I've left you so little time now. Well, we don't have a strict time limit, but anyway.
I am going to take a much narrower look at about what rewilding might be, and is there sort of a natural rewilding that one should do, or is there other reasons that one should do something like that? And what you expressed last week that I recalled is that there is no pure thing that we should be returning to, and I do agree with that. But nonetheless, I'm still sort of charmed in many ways by by a movement that is kind of seeking to do exactly that, or seeking to get as close as they can anyway. So essentially, the question that you can ask yourself is what would be the natural flora and fauna here if humans hadn't had the impacts that they'd had? I suppose that's the simplest question you could ask, and then the simplest directive would be to get as close to that as you possibly could, and provide wild spaces for that environment and for those animals.
Hang on, by here now, are you saying just here in general, wherever you are, or are you talking about Ireland?
I mean, it would be it's obviously location specific, but Ireland is an interesting kind of case in this matter because we had a massive extinction as a result of being under a big block of ice some 10,000-15,000 years ago. So
let's go back to that.
Exactly. But
sounds
more
much
broadly
less
speaking, there's a movement that has emerged with this specific priority in mind, and it surrounds Pleistocene rewilding. So we're in the Holocene now, starting some, I don't know, it's like 12,000-13,000 years ago, and it's marked as sort of the Great Change, or whatever is where the name comes from in Greek, I've forgotten. But the idea is it's when we started to have a major impact on the world. And before that was the Pleistocene. Now, the Pleistocene was, of course, on the tail end of changing climates and ice age, etc. But it represents the flora and fauna before humans spread outside of Africa, and coincidentally, though there are arguments about the exact causes, a huge number of animals went extinct. But also many animals were just pushed out of their natural habitat. So wolves, used to live in Ireland, for example. Now they live somewhere else. And so sometimes it's just about moving animals around. And that's what these guys are really into. Now, like I said, Ireland would have had different trees, etc. But if you really want a good look at what a Pleistocene environment would look at, you go to, say, France, and you can see that these guys have already put together lists of the animals that you'd want to just reintroduce and grow their populations in Europe. So to give you examples, so there's some of it's just expanding populations of things like wolves and lynx and bear and ibex and stuff. But the introduction species, I think, would be the really fun one to imagine. So this is like long-term Green Party agenda, I think, maybe, and I approve, to reintroduce things like the Asian black bear, the Asian elephant, even though it sounds crazy. Like they're able to survive in a lot of European populations, and there used to be elephants here. It was the straight-tusked elephant, most recently. But yeah, you could totally see it as normal potentially for a rewilded area in France to have elephants, bears, lions, camels, hippopotami in the southern parts of Europe.
Hippopotami.
The kind of leopard, antelope, hyena, gazelle, and rhinoceri. I'm actually not sure if I should be pluralizing them that way.
Hang on. We're talking about Europe now. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Europe. These things and lions. Yeah, they used to
bring it on.
Exactly. That's how I feel. Like this isn't even like going into the crazy stuff, which I'll get to later. But like these are animals that could thrive in some existing, but mostly ones that would need to be sort of curated to a certain degree, rich ecosystems, and they could do great in Europe. And I kind of think it's not cool the way we get mad at other countries for failing to like protect their tigers, etc. And yet we're grand with just sort of.
And we're not reintroducing tigers in Ireland.
Yeah,
we're hypocrites.
Yeah. Now, yeah, I mean, not like in Tiger King, but there's definitely a good way of doing it.
It's true. It's so easy to like to point fingers outside, because even at things going on in other in countries, and they're not doing enough to protect this animal, that animal, And then when they like reintroduce like what was it like certain birds of prey in parts of Ireland, of course the farmers are going crazy and they're like against it, or I mean not exclusively, but like what did they reintroduce in Donegal?
Yeah, they've been.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it was the eagles. I mean, there's a few eagle species that there have been reintroduction efforts for, and they typically, I don't know, I hear about them usually because someone's poisoned an eagle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it's obviously not the same people. I doubt it's the same people who are poisoning the eagles who are saying that like India is not protecting their tigers, um, but
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, no, totally good point. It's like, well, what are we doing?
exactly. And I think then we have to address the fact that this kind of Pleistocene rewilding effort is not associated with de-extinction. They're just trying to make do the best that we can with the animals that we have to fill the ecosystems that we should be facilitating. And I think that is the most sensible policy. But at the same time, people are working and making a lot of progress on de-extinction.
You're talking about the woolly mammoth?
Well, the woolly mammoth is one very high-profile example for a number of reasons, but it goes beyond that. So de-extinction exists in a kind of a spectrum, in the sense that you might be dealing with like collecting the DNA of an animal that's going extinct, and if you keep more and more genetic information on those animals, then you'll be able to use it to, say, do gene editing of an inbred population and introduce more variants that are healthy in the species but that have died out, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that might be like the least offensive de-extinction. People also tend to get less offended by the de-extinction of plants, which has been done, and there's people want to bring back the American chestnut, for example, and it's kind of associated with a lot of plant genetics that we use for a lot of different things. And of course it goes all the way to, you will say the mammoth, for example, which is a huge project, of course. Now the Asian elephant is quite closely related to the mammoth. It's not an inconceivable project, but nonetheless they take a very long time to grow up, and we have good reason to be ethically concerned about their well-being. But then again,
yeah, like maybe we don't, maybe like does anyone think the woolly mammoth want to be brought into this world?
Yeah, I guess that's it's a difficult question. It's probably an impossible question to answer, I think.
Yeah, well, okay, but first we just need to perfect the interspecies, uh, dead species telepathy, first of all.
Yes, yeah,
And then
okay.
we'll just check in with them, whether they want to be. But yeah, it's continue. Patrick, do you remember that we actually talked about this on our radio show many moons ago on Trinity FM?
That makes a lot of sense. I think I wrote an article about it when I was in Trinity. In the Trinity newspaper post, and they
the long-standing interest of yours.
They changed the name of it to it annoyed me. They said they included the word species because they wanted to singular. They took a sentence that I didn't want as a title, and then they saw species, but they were like, oh no, it's singular, so we'll say species, which is not a. I mean, it's a word, but it means like money in coin form. Anyway, I'll get over it at some point.
Someday. Anyway,
so what I'm getting at there is that de-extinction, like basically, as the cost of it goes down, as it will, and our information about how to do it goes up, because it will for other reasons, and also because clearly many of the greatest geneticists in the world are obsessed with this, or at least George Church, who is a pretty prolific researcher of an experimental bent. So he produces a lot of he has companies, etc., and he's working on the woolly mammoth problem, and the goal is to make it like a multi-generational thing where they'll basically reclaim the tundra and reestablish ecosystems that are better for storing carbon. I mean, it all sounds great. It's hard to predict exactly how it will go, and I don't think that right now it's as obviously sustainable as the rewilding efforts mentioned before. But there are bigger questions, I think, here, because you ask, do we want the mammoth to come back? I guess if it's a tragedy to kill the last mammoth, then at least to some degree it is a boon to bring back the first mammoth. Unless the individual mammoth's experience is the only thing that matters. I don't see why we aren't on some level responsible for renewing that diversity. But then I guess it gets kind of tricky because, I mean, first of all, obviously you get a lot of fun animals that are crazy to imagine and maybe a bit impractical to have around the place. I'm not gonna lie.
But not if we also reinstate that ice age in Ireland.
Yeah, no, of course. If we reinstate the Ice Age, we'll be fine. We don't really need to, even if we come back and just don't reinstate, a land bridge, then nothing comes. But you do end up with, across Europe, you'll have things like the woolly mammoth, obviously. You'll have these aurochs. You have cave lions, cave bears. They are enormous. Cave hyenas. I think caves is just at this point.
Cave hyenas,
Cave
wow.
hyenas, yeah. I mean, and most of these things were not from caves. It's just that they were found there. Saber-toothed tigers, the different kinds around the world, they were very prolific. The Irish elk, which were fun, they were all over the place, not just Ireland. Giant polar bears, as if existing polar bears. I mean, I could just go on and on.
Is it existing polar bears are not?
Yeah, they're huge. The record weight is a ton.
Oh my god.
Yeah, Australia, by the way, would have lots of mental stuff. You'd have to bring back the giant short-faced kangaroo, which is a giant... is that the carnivorous one? No, the carnivorous one had actually already died out. But you do get a giant wombat.
Carnivorous kangaroo. Well, kangaroos are... Oh, hang on. I don't know.
I think there might be some omnivory, but I don't think... This was like a predator kangaroo.
Okay, well, that would be quite a...
I think kangaroos are
Why haven't they... Sorry, I was just thinking, how come they haven't made that movie yet? Like the predatory kangaroo.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you might have an evil kangaroo or two in like video games or something. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, on the subject of movies, Jen wants to know why we aren't heeding the warning that Jurassic Park gave us.
No, you see,
it's a clear question.
They were from the Cretaceous and Triassic periods, and they're notorious pricks. So if you just focus on
so we're
Pleistocene
sticking to the Holocene. They're much chiller.
They're much chiller. But there's a lot of really funny stuff here. There's one which I just had to get another look at. It's called Dasypus bellus, which means the beautiful armadillo. I tried to find out why this thing gets to be called the beautiful armadillo, and I didn't get an answer. But that would be something in North America. You also get a lot of big birds. Anyway, there's just a lot of cool, crazy stuff here that if this movement continued to make progress, because these things all died within the past, 30, 50,000 years max, I think, it would be likely that we could actually bring them all back. That is definitely possible. And I think it's just mad to imagine that even some small selection of them could become just normal. Just like, invasive species is kind of something where there wasn't any of them, and then someone leaves a few wallabies on Lambay Island, and now they just run the place.
Boom. Yeah.
I just want to go to the one last most controversial thing, though, because if you wanted to take this idea that you want to perfectly return the environments that humans destroyed over history, there are 3 more species, 2 in particular definitely, that you'd have to consider bringing back. And one of them is Neanderthals. One of them is Homo denisova, and the other one is Homo erectus. Homo erectus and Neanderthals in particular were all over the place. There were quite a lot of them, and I think it's fair to assume that humans are just as likely to have been involved in their death as all the other things here. And yeah, there's just one fun anecdote about this, which is that when the same geneticist I mentioned earlier, who's working on the mammoths, George Church, was being interviewed by Der Spiegel, he described this question of bringing back Neanderthals, and he kind of made a case, for why they might have, interesting ways of thinking. It would be a diversity of thought that we've lost, and that there's so much that was taken away that could be communicated with, and we could learn from them, and we could provide a good environment, etc. And then he kind of said, what he said was that it would be difficult to get a female volunteer or something like that, and that was mistranslated as he is seeking female volunteers to give birth to the first Neanderthal, which wasn't true, but he got loads and loads of people sending him letters asking to volunteer.
Wait, say that again. I didn't quite hear that. He was seeking female
No, it
volunteers.
was a mistranslation in when it was printed in Dutch, saying that he was seeking female volunteers to have a Neanderthal child,
Okay.
and loads of people volunteered, and then he had to let them down, say that it wasn't on the cards.
Um, do you know about this? I mean, sorry, I was going to say this for another episode, but it's actually nothing to do with the future, really. But there was some awful, this, oh, what is his name? But there was some awful, I think he was Russian. Or no, maybe he wasn't actually Russian, but the Russians gave him the money for it. Anyway, this scientist who did very unethical, like, experiments of trying to crossbreed like humans and chimps.
Yes, I did see that
Yeah.
actually.
Um, and he also went to, where did he go? It was like, uh, mm, 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 mm. I think he went to some East African country and was kind of trying to do it there. I mean, the government copped on. They just like kicked him out of the country. They were just like, "You think you can just come here and do this?" Like, no. You're like totally unethical as a scientist, and also racist and sexist because it was also getting women to. Anyway, it was yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
about
that's
the
another
most
beside the
topical
point.
topic.
But the thing about but yeah, but the thing about Neanderthals and the yeah, yeah, I feel like I was talking to someone about that recently, but I don't know why. Like, imagine a world like because there wasn't there a period when Neanderthals and humans would have been, I suppose, interbreeding in some extent.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah,
we would have between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA.
yeah. So, I mean, what would it be like if they were still, what would it, a world where, I mean, to be honest, all I can imagine it was that it would be there would be lots of racism. Like, it would definitely be some sort of like um I don't know if there was literally because I mean there's been enough awful shit done to other humans under the like or
Um,
kind of with the excuse that they're somehow lesser
mhm.
than uh, than some other humans, whatever, because of skin care. I was gonna say skin care, skin color, or intelligence, or where they're from, or language speak, or whatever. So like if there literally was another species, like if we speciesism is maybe the word that I was looking for there.
Yeah, it is a.
But what do you think? Like, yeah, what do you think about the bringing the
Well, I think that
bringing
the
back
actual
the Neanderthal?
practicalities of doing it reveal a lot of sort of ethical moats that I don't think are likely to be crossed. But if you instead imagine it having been done, and then like what would the interactions be like? Um,
Hmm.
I think first of all, I think my hunch is that we would overestimate how big of a difference it would be. We would preempt a greater inability to communicate and be on good terms with and understand similar things to Neanderthals. It's not at all predictable, but there's some research showing that they had versions of genes associated with language that are the same as ours, and that if they're knocked out in us, cause deficiencies in language. That's not really definitive at all, but they did absorb culture from humans when exposed to them relatively quickly, but they didn't seem to generate it as quickly for themselves. But a huge part of that could have just been the fact that they lived in smaller groups. So humans were assembling in groups of
Hmm.
like 100 to 150, Dunbar's number or whatever. Neanderthals seem to, I mean, it's hard to tell, but they seem to operate mostly in family groups, occasionally like small extended family groups.
So humans were already having like 10 meetings and stuff.
Yeah, humans were just sort of, they were just networking, okay? Um,
Yeah.
uh,
They were just naturally more, yeah, better networkers.
it's again, it's not something we can tell much from, but it's definitely the case that the brain case of Neanderthals was very big. So it's not like they had like if you go back to earlier humans, you can see a big difference in the size of brain regions associated with this and that. Whereas Neanderthals, it's bigger than humans on average. Um, and I think we generally overestimate our intelligence biologically and underappreciate how our intelligence is a function of like kind of social cognition that we selectively tap into, and then we sort of immediately understand things without ever having to do any of the work, which other animals can't do. And I'd say Neanderthals maybe this is just again rampant speculation. I'd say they maybe weren't as good at that as we were.
They weren't as good at overestimating their intelligence.
No, I think they weren't as good at. Sorry, they weren't as good at.
I think it definitely helps. It helps you to get ahead.
Fake it till you make it.
If men are anything to go by, no. We're back to back to that.
But no, I think that they were. I think that I guess I'm just saying they were less social, so I think that made them not able to develop a broader intellectual architecture as much as humans did. I don't know.
Yeah, but I do think, like, in terms of, and I think this is, maybe actually this is already giving me an inkling of what I might talk about next week or another time. But I do think, this whole issue of how intelligent we see ourselves, but also the fact that, like, we can't go. It's still hard to put yourself in the body or the mind of other animals, and the fact that the way we see the world and the way we like perceive and interact with the world, that's only one way of knowing the one way of interacting in the world. And even like our knowledge, in terms of our knowledge and our intelligence of how we would like say manipulate like certain materials and to make tools and things like that. And we've gotten quite a long way with that, more than some other animals. But at the same time, there's ways that other animals, that we see that as like, oh, see, we're superior because this.
We just
but then there's other animals, the way they interact with the world, like, I don't know, even just like silly examples of like monkeys jumping around in trees, or like how certain like insects underground and things they can detect. And so I suppose there's so many different ways of interacting with the world, and like we just have we have our niche, which, as we mentioned last week, maybe we've like we've really gone with the exploiting of that. That like every animal exploits their environment, but we're really exploiting it quite a lot. But that there's all kinds of different ways out there. Like, so it'd be interesting what it would throw up. As Jen is also agreeing with me that they would probably be treated like an underclass, though.
Well, I think there are a few things we know about Neanderthals for sure. And one of them is we have confident estimations of their strength. And
they beat us in a fight.
Oh, absolutely. Neanderthals were close quarters hunters that were hunting large European, like the things I was mentioning before was the kind of things they were hunting, including
hippos.
I don't know about if they were far enough south for hippos. They were at some point. They did go all the way to the Mediterranean, but that was during some pretty cold times. But there's lots of evidence of them having severe wounds and evidence of them having healed each other and kept each other, feeding each other when they were wounded.
It's certainly an interesting. Sorry to interrupt.
No, just as a raw example of strength, it's estimated based off the bone size and the kind of leverage that they would have, that a female Neanderthal, just an average female Neanderthal, would be able to beat any male arm wrestling champion in the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting as a thought experiment of what would happen if they were already here. Like we had suddenly Neanderthals were here. But I suppose in terms of our thing of thinking about like feasibility and desirability, like I suppose I just can't quite envision like a motivation to bring back Neanderthals.
The only one I can imagine is that rewilding gets done more broadly, and that there's a stepwise increase in terms of how much people are willing to see a new animal that they didn't associate with this environment. Maybe that's threatening, maybe that's weird. Like wolves is already a big challenge for some people, but maybe the next one will be things like Asian elephant. That'll be next. At some point, it'll be Asian elephants in Europe, etc. If every time people are like, this was a good call, then maybe. And some.
Yeah, but I think it's a thing of like, it's actually about, we were talking about last week how, perceiving other, we don't perceive ourselves as animal. We look at other animals and we see ourselves as kind of exceptional. And so I suppose it's that it seems to me that Neanderthals would be sort of like too close to us, that we see them in sort of like a form that's like ourselves. So we don't actually, because they're so close to us, like
I don't think we can actually just put them in the parks and let them fend for themselves. I don't think we can do that.
No, but that's the thing. That's the funny thing, that we would only want to bring back, we'd only want to, sorry, but imagining it from the current viewpoint of how we view like nature and animals as, the sort of thing that we should protect or preserve, that kind of narrative we were talking about last week. It seems that we would want to bring back nice animals, or ones that seem nice and wild, and it'd be interesting. It's interesting in terms of I mean, that's a whole other maybe conversation, and now we're sort of maybe a bit out of time. But
Yeah,
like,
perhaps.
what's our agenda for which animals we want to bring back? You know,
Yeah,
because I think
actually,
a lot of money often goes into, like, for example, research and stuff. Money often goes into, say, in terms of wildlife specifically, like people trying to protect, these sort of, like the whole thing with the panda of like, oh, species that are nice and cute and lovely or cool and wild, but then not these kind of maybe more boring stoat like animals, like with another some kind of South American stoat type animal
yes,
that was
yes.
an option to be like that could be brought back. It's extinct, but would be sort of a candidate for de-extincting whatever, because had a really good like key place in the ecosystem, but probably they weren't going to get necessarily the funding to do that because people didn't want to donate money, or like philanthropists, or like the public or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not really like a sexy enough animal to bring back, so
Yeah, no, I think though what you
yeah.
were saying there is actually something I wrote down and never said, which is yeah, what's the kind of middle ground between all this cool potential mad science stuff, um, and and sort of the idea that we should be seeking some true natural pre-human state, which I think is, of course, in its absolute sense, is kind of silly. Things are different now, but I think it does still make sense to sort of work out, as in a sort of progressive, pragmatic way, what is the
Mm.
richest ecosystem that can thrive in this country or this part of a country that we can effectively prevent being exposed, or at least ruined by human populations, and we can take care about anything coming out of it that might interfere with people's lives. That's not an insignificant concern. And then and then kind of there is an engineering element to it, basically, and I think that the tools of this more pure approach of going back to the Pleistocene is,
Mm.
they are valuable because they do tell us what most animals most recently were most well adapted to, in these kinds of regions. And I think it's still
Mm.
useful ammunition, even if
Yeah.
you shouldn't follow it to the letter or something.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's actually quite complex. I mean, it's more interesting, I suppose, to talk in the more speculative end of things, but it's also quite complicated because you'd have to sort of bring back enough things that are in an ecosystem that can survive together. You know what I mean? Not just
Yeah.
like, oh, let's just bring the hippopotamus, but or this like Pleistocene hippopotamus, but then now it doesn't have any of the things that it
Yeah.
normally ate, or or it doesn't have
Although
any
the
natural
hippos
predators.
in
So then
in Colombia are
hippopotami
doing
run
just fine.
wild, rampage through like Italy, and destroy the fields, and all these kind of
Sorry,
things,
John. Have
like
you
when
have, have you
yeah.
not heard of Pablo Escobar's hippopotami?
Oh, I have, yes.
Yeah.
I actually only recently watched a little bit of some like uh or listened to some kind of documentary where they were talking. It was all about Pablo Escobar's
For any
hippopotami.
listeners who are not aware what we're talking about,
Anyway,
in Colombia, Pablo Escobar had some hippos stolen and carted in, and then he had a sort of harem of hippopotami on his land, and then they bred like twice as fast as they do in Africa, because it's always the wet season or something. And now there are loads of them. The government wants to kill them, but the people like them, so they won't let them. Sorry, yes, you were saying.
yeah, yeah, they're very beloved. Yeah, okay, so yeah, I think that's a maybe we should leave that. But it's a very interesting topic, and very kind of exciting and interesting. In terms
Yeah.
of the thinking and the not being again on the side of like, okay, maybe rather than it's very serious issues around biodiversity that exist in the world. But yeah, how could we? I mean, it's a big gap there, or the big between what you're talking about and where we are now. I suppose it's like the will, the political will, and the money, and the research and all that. But yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of
I'm looking forward to
uh
it at least someday.
bringing stuff back. Yeah,
Good
I
stuff.
thought that the last wait, I was going to say that the last weeks we often left quite suddenly, but I thought well, I was going to say maybe we should have some sort of like final thought type,
Ah.
type thing. Although that being said, I was just going to ask you if you have a final thought, because I didn't prepare anything.
um, I suppose the final thought has to
On that
be,
on
how
that
do we
topic, or
integrate these two things so that in the future you can use telepathy to ride a giant wombat? 1 ton.
We use telepathy to ride a giant wombat.
Yeah, they're extinct now. They would weigh.
Hang on, what's a wombat look like again?
I'll have to let you work that out on your own time.
Oh, yeah. Wait, is this like megafauna? Like
Yeah.
is that were they in the Pleistocene era as well?
Yeah,
The
I mean,
megafauna.
there are megafauna that would be older than that, but the one like the whole article about Pleistocene megafauna is basically just a list of the big things that died, and one of them is this giant wombat, Diprotodon.
Oh my god! And also, I just found when I googled that, I just found the best wombat movie ever been made with three exclamation marks. And it looks like I think it's just the angle of the camera now, but it looks like it's the size of a cow. So I'm guessing this is not a mega wombat, giant wombat. That would be amazing. That reminds me of. Have you seen the film? Um, mm, these giant, like, kind of mutant kind of pigs. It's on Netflix.
Nope, I haven't
Uh, hang
You're
on, I
gonna
want to
find
find
it. You're determined to find it.
Okja.
Okay,
A
I'll check it out.
genetic super pig and the environment. It's a very good, lovely movie. It's apparently the internet tells me it's the world's first ecological action movie, and it's
Sponsored
nice
by
because
Okja.
yeah, and it's nice because it's like a nice satire on both the giant corporations, which also features this giant corporation also features Tilda Swinton. So if that's not enough of reason to watch this movie, I don't know what is. And yeah, but also some satire on these vegan vandals, I suppose.
Very nice. Well, if anyone watches Okja, leave a brief review in the comments. I certainly am some way to being sold.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's enough. I will catch you next week, and
yes,
I'll have to this time come up with a brand new topic. I don't think there's any more ways to dovetail off that one.
Oh yeah, you did. There's a lot of related ones. It's good. I'm kind of just hopping all over the place. You've got a little more continuity going there. Okay. Well, pleasure talking to you as always. Thank you everyone for the lovely comments. Or lovely, I mean by lovely I mean intellectually rigorous.
Most of them, anyway.
Yes.
All right. See it.
Bye.